Okay, we are recording. So hello viewers, something a little bit different today. Today I've got Michal Pruski here today to talk about some worrying trends that he's observing in response to the coronavirus situation and assisted dying. But I think it's probably best to hear it from him. So Michal, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then what's the worry, what you're concerned about, and then I'll give you my thoughts.
Yes, thank you so much, Richard. So I'm currently working as a healthcare scientist in the NHS. My PhD is mainly in cellular science, cellular medical science, but I also have a degree in clinical science. I'm a registered clinical scientist. I also have a degree in bioethics and medical law, and that's kind of my passion. So today I'm speaking more with my bioethics hat on rather than anything else. Yeah, I just was talking to people, reading the news, and I just found some of the things that are said a bit striking. What precipitated all of this was when Matt Hancock commented on the permissibility of travel, saying that it's a valid reason, and even during lockdown people can travel for it. And well, it just made me really think, like, why do we have a lockdown? What's the point of it? And it seems to me that, like, we're having a lockdown because we're trying to save lives, stop the virus from spreading, and to reduce the burden on the NHS, because if the NHS is overburdened, then we can really be treating everybody who gets ill to a good standard, and potentially some tough choices have to be made. That's a sad fact of life. So it seemed to me quite weird that especially in the first phase of lockdown, we had a lot of restrictions. A lot of hospitals were trying to reduce the amount of certain procedures carrying out, certain the volume of certain clinics to prevent people from mingling and spreading the virus. And so it's all been done to prevent and to promote the well-being of the people in the long run. And it came with some huge sacrifices, because people's mental health might have suffered. People haven't been getting the necessary support for all sorts of conditions. And here Matt Hancock is saying that if you want to die, you can go and travel for a long distance, potentially, if you're an asymptomatic carrier, spreading the virus for the purpose of dying, when the whole point of lockdown seems to be to stop people from dying. And lockdown obviously implies social isolation here, where we hear all the time about people not being able to see their relatives in care homes, people not being able to see their friends and family for a very long time, even people who are at increased need of support. And yeah, so people might be feeling lonely, like if you're elderly and you don't have a job or anything like that you can continue. Perhaps you're feeling slightly purposeless. And I was chatting a bit with some people about it, and they highlight, well, that people seek assisted dying, either because they don't want to die some kind of horrible death, or because they just feel, lonely and purposeless, which is kind of what the lockdown is fueling, or at least it seems to be fueling in a lot of people, feeling lonely, feeling depressed and stuff like that. So it's almost, if you were into some kind of conspiracy theory, like you would be like, well, it's designed because you're creating more people who are feeling lonely, possibly depressed, who then, feel purposeless, and who then might to seek assisted suicide for this purpose. And this whole permission to saying that it's permissible to go and seek assisted suicide, on this background seems particularly weird, where there's a lot of restrictions on religious services, and people being able to visit the relatives in care homes, and it's often through these social interactions that we have a lot of joy, we have a feeling of community, of purpose. So yeah, it just seems to me, a bit silly. And I think there's some maybe further reflections that we will have on this. And in a way, like, I don't want to necessarily blame the government for the restrictions themselves. I think it's difficult because, like, obviously there's different goods to be balanced against each other almost in this situation, because there's like the goods of health and there's the goods of friendship and stuff like that. And some people would prefer a balance on this, some people will prefer a balance on that. Maybe you're fine sitting at home alone, drinking a lot of wine, that some people like that, but people criticize the government. I think people would criticize the government, whatever form of restrictions they would do. I don't want to debate the merits of the particular restrictions that are put in place. So I don't blame them for that, but I just think that on the background of all of this, and what seemingly is the purpose of making these restrictions to preserve life, and then you put in a statement like that, man, it's like, well, what's the point of it? And I think people will even become like more bamboozled by the whole situation. But yeah, and I think the other thing, that going back to the whole restrictions on various church services and stuff like that, is that I think, like, it's clear that we're living in quite the secular society nowadays, and I think it's not a society that stimulates hope, or that helps to bring suffering into some kind of context. Like, I mean, the problem of suffering is as long as mankind, probably. But I think a lot of religious groups provide people with some kind of hope, and they provide a framework for interpreting the suffering that they're experiencing in life. And again, I think the lockdown is not helping with that. And then if this is one of the reasons why people might be, if suffering and purposeless and loneliness are some of the reasons why people might seek assisted suicide, well, then it's just feeding into each other. And it's Christmas, and well, it's not Christmas. Christmas is approaching slowly. We're just about to start Advent, but it's a time when people also do a lot of shopping. And I think especially nowadays, Christmas is quite the consumerist festival, so to say. And I think in such a consumerist society, where we're also chasing perfection. I don't think perfection and virtue is necessary, but like physical perfection and material wealth, you know, people are even more afraid of me a bit about, you know, Brave New World and how people were afraid of anything that wasn't perfect and youthful. And again, you know, the lockdown isn't helping, you know, with such a climate and with people being able to handle all their problems. And yeah, I mean, Matt Hancock stated that his comments do not change the current legal situation with regards to assisted suicide. But that's, you know, that's been like a big debate in recent times, partially because the recent British medical brewing in Ireland as well at the moment, and I think the Netherlands changed its legislation, I think, recently as well on some of that. So, well, I think for sure his statement might reinvigorate the debate on the issue. And I think, you know, as one of our mutual acquaintances said, you know, doing yoga on an icy slope is not a good idea. And I think with the whole lockdown situation and with all the restrictions, how it's, you know, affecting people's minds, perhaps it's ending up being a bit of an icy slope with regards to assisted suicide that we're starting to stand on. So I'm not sure if you want to raise maybe some issues with regards to this. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So kind of to sum it up in my own words to make sure I've understood. So the gist is that the lockdown is designed to save lives, and yet, ironically, particularly in having this exception and in banning religious services and so on and so forth, and at this time of year, it's sort of the perfect storm for increasing the demand for people to end their own lives, which is on the face of it counter to the goals of the lockdown itself. And then just so that I'm completely clear, and just to refresh it for the viewers, so Matt Hancock, we've got the national lockdown, but Matt Hancock said there's an exception if you're traveling to another country to engage in assisted dying. Is that?
Yeah, so he made a statement. Well, there's a BBC article from the 5th of November with the headline being COVID-19 assisted dying travel allowed during lockdown, says Hancock. So, and there's a wee video of him explaining what he meant. So, yeah.
And for any viewers who aren't either from Britain or don't know about our laws, assisted dying is not legal in this country, but it is permitted to travel to a country where it is legal, such as the Netherlands and Switzerland, to have it done over there, so to speak.
Yeah.
Good. I mean, I do think that is really worrying, and I like your observation that, and I thought it deserved paying a bit more attention to, your observation that shutting down religious organizations is liable to lead to an increase in feelings of hopelessness and despair, and then that leads to an increase in desire for assisted dying. Because even though we are a very secular society, I've got a lot of friends who are atheists, non-believers in any way, but when life gets really tough, they will go to a church and they'll have a chat with a priest or a pastor, just because it's a kind of a safe space, and it's kind of, and so it clearly fulfills a need even for people who aren't, shall we say, actively religious. And so you're right, I think we do live in a secular society, but we shouldn't underestimate, and even the Christians or people who actively go to church and Muslims and Jews are, who go regularly, is probably, I don't know what the stats are, but not that much of the population. The broader society probably does use it more than we we kind of realize. Because
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can think of at least 2 examples just off the top of my head of people who aren't believers, but when life got really tough, they went to a church and they had a chat with the guy, and they said to him, you know, I don't believe, but I'm struggling, and the vicar just took them, you know, under his wing and said, all right, I'll do what I can to help you. So I thought that was really interesting. I guess the only thought that occurred to me when you sent me some notes in advance of this, I was reading through them, is that although I can see that this is in a sense the perfect storm and sort of deeply counterproductive in that trying to save lives, they're encouraging people to end their own, or, you know, accidentally. It does seem to me that the vaccine looks like it's going to arrive imminently, if not already here to some extent. And it looks like, if the news is to be believed and the stuff from politicians, and maybe you as a scientist would like to weigh in on this, I don't know. It looks like the vaccine is going to come into play early next year. And so by, you know, spring or summer next year, it will be a completely different situation, and we'll sort of be back to where we were previously. In which case, whilst this is a bad thing, is it something for us to get terribly worked up about, given it's been a horrible blip in our collective calendars and in our lives, and I'm sure we'll all talk about it 40 years from now, if we're still alive then. But you know, if it may not have these big, long-lasting impacts. So why is it such a big deal?
Oh, good question. I mean, I think I would want to not comment on when we'll have a vaccine, because I think at the moment, you know, a lot of people say things, and I think what will happen will happen. You know, maybe we'll have it sooner, maybe we'll have it later. What kind of vaccine we'll have, how many people will be happy with it. You know, there's a lot of factors in that. But yeah, I think, you know, assuming things will get sorted, who knows how it will go. Like, I think there have been several attempts to get assisted suicide legislation, you know, passed through in the UK, and, you know, successful, because we don't have it here yet.
So could you say, you froze for a second, could you say that last bit again? Sorry.
Oh yeah, like we had, you know, many attempts in the UK, I think, to pass through assisted suicide legislation, and, you know, clearly didn't go through because we don't have it. You know, whether it will reinvigorate the discussion, how much, you know, the people's thoughts have changed, and whether they have reflected throughout this period, whether, you know, these reflections will have a long-lasting impact on people. You know, that's a separate question, and I don't want to guess, you know, either way. Perhaps, you know, people will forget about COVID and the whole thing pretty fast. Perhaps, you know, we'll have memories of it, and, you know, had time to reflect, you know, and will carry those thoughts with them for a long time. But I don't know whether, you know, the whole fact that society is getting more secular, you know, in general, and you know, whether that will have an impact. I also don't know, you know, what will be the impact of various, you know, environmental movements, you know, that in a way are not spiritual, but try to limit materialism, you know, to some extent. You know, I know they're generally not perceived as the allies of Christianity and stuff like that, but, you know, they in this sense of a counterculture, perhaps they might shift thinking in one way or another, you know, disability rights campaigners and stuff like that. But, you know, I think it's hard to make predictions on this exactly. But I think New Zealand recently passed through legislation about assisted dying. I think possibly there might be some expansion in Australia. I'm not completely sure about that. I think at least one state there has legislation both for assisted suicide and I guess euthanasia, because it's medical practitioner administered, you know, so it's not really, it's not just that they prescribe it. so who knows? But I think though, it shows certain trends, in society. But I think that it highlights certain problems that perhaps we as citizens and as communities, should be working on, because part of the thing I think that happened, and I'm guilty as charged, is that we live in the world where it's quite easy to travel and to move between societies and countries and stuff like that. But I don't know how much it caused the erosion of communities. Like sometimes you look at people who live in multi-generational households and you're like thinking, yeah, look what the wonderful support for the family. And I'm not saying that only has pluses and there are no negatives to these situations either. But there's certainly something to be said about community. And like, how did McIntyre describe it? Dependent rational animals, like to highlight the dependence. And and especially going back to churches and stuff like that, community is so key to our existence as human beings. Like we being some kind of hermit, is the most hardcore thing, you can be in a way, because you're separated from your fellow humans, and we need that contact, in so many ways. So I think whatever it happens, perhaps it is a call to highlight the importance of communities and building, stronger, not only faith communities, but local communities, support networks, and, stronger family ties, So I know it's been quite a grim talk, or quite grim reflections for me, but perhaps, that's the positive message, perhaps we should rediscover the value of a community.
Mm. So what you're saying is, in terms of the positives, this has shown us the importance of community, both faith-based and more general local communities, because that can act as an antidote to this lack of, this despair and lack of purpose and so on and so forth. But the thing that's concerning you about it, sort of in response to my original sort of, why does this matter, is a bit more open-ended. It's sort of like, in a sense, we may end up back where we are, but it highlights some troubling trends in our politics and I'll say the Western world more generally, as more and more countries relax more and more of their laws, and this as potentially in some sense it was an inconsequential throwaway statement, but in another sense it shows that debate's still going on. It's going to reopen the demand for it, and then we may very well find ourselves in a few years having referendums or whatever on euthanasia and assisted dying, or changes in legislation, and we need to be very cautious about that. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah. I mean, hopefully, nobody will try to bring in some kind of, a lot of various legal or quasi-legal changes have been brought in due to COVID, but hopefully assisted suicide will not be one of them. So
yeah, it will be. So when it blows over, it will go back to normal with no permanent.
Or well, no, I mean, at least like the last thing you want to have is emergency assisted suicide laws, due to coronavirus. Like I think the debate is, almost in some for sure will happen at some point. Like I don't think it's a topic that people decided, well, we had a couple attempts in parliament, so let's not try again. Sooner or later it will happen.
Yeah, the debate's not going away. Yeah. There was something when you were talking, and I wasn't sure. I think if I thought about it, maybe I could work out what the difference is, but maybe for me and then also for the viewer. You distinguish between euthanasia and assisted dying and assisted suicide. What are these? What's the difference between them? Is your opinion on them all the same? You're clearly opposed to some of it. Are you opposed to all of it? What's the distinction?
So I think like generally people tend to distinguish, whether it's a situation where the healthcare professional usually prescribes, some kind of medication that the person then takes, and as a consequence of which they die, but the healthcare professional doesn't administer it. Whereas like euthanasia, I think is generally more thought of about, when the healthcare practitioner or whomever is licensed to perform the act, administers well, I wanted to say medication. Perhaps perhaps linking it with medicine is not the best choice. But yeah, so I think assisted suicide, that's generally the first category, and euthanasia basically is the second one. And I'm not really a fan of either. That's not to say that I don't think that good sedation is a bad idea. Good pain, maybe not good pain relief, and the sedation that might be associated with it, like if it's appropriate way to control, the patient's suffering, then yeah. The same, withdrawal of unnecessary burdensome treatment. I think that's fine. Even if the patient dies as a consequence of that, if the treatment itself, not so much the patient's life, but the treatment itself is perceived, then I don't think we should be vitalists and trying to preserve life necessarily, under all circumstances. It's generally something good to aim for, but I don't think we should be making people suffer because we're trying to treat them. So yeah, and that's not to say that I support things like passive euthanasia or something like that. I think there's a lot of important philosophical distinctions that could be drawn here, but partly what is the intent, though good intent doesn't justify everything. But yeah, that's like an important thing to highlight.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking we could definitely get into, maybe we'll have to do this again at some stage and talk about all of those distinctions. But the general gist is euthanasia is when the doctor is very much involved with the administration of the drugs that results in the death. But assisted sort of suicide or dying, that's when he might prescribe it but not administer it himself or herself.
Yeah. I think that's bad. I think for the level of today's talk, I think that's probably a good way to summarize it. Yeah,
euthanasia is more actively involved than okay, that makes sense. I think we should definitely have another conversation at some stage about distinction between, because I'm not sure whether this isn't their expertise for me, I know a little bit about it, but about passive euthanasia and some of the things that you were describing. But I can see that, again, for the purpose of this conversation, the distinction perhaps is about the intention. Is the intention to prevent pain, or is it to end their life? And I can see that will do as a working definition for this. I think that's really interesting. Good. I mean, and then I guess my final question, I think you've already kind of hinted at, but I jotted down here, and I think the answer is going to be to do with community. But what can we as individuals do about this? If you're concerned about these trends in society, what can we do? Obviously, that we can do stuff in the polling booth and things like that. But what can we do on a more individual, active, personal level?
I think befriending might be a good idea. I was like perhaps
Oh,
change my own life.
sorry, you froze again. Could you say that last bit again?
Sorry. Yeah, I was thinking about maybe perhaps, what I should change in my life in response to this. And I thought, well, probably the simplest thing that we can all do is maybe do some more befriending, like it's quite time consuming, but it's in essence a simple thing. And I think, a lot of these, what I find, particularly uplifting is that there's, in some places, there are some schemes where they try to get small children in to play with, retired people and stuff like that. And I think, these are good things, to do. And I think it's really down to like simple human contact in other people's lives and opening your lives, to them, because, I think, and you can see it from like people who are especially, parents and grandparents, there comes a time where they're more interested, in the children's and grandkids' lives than they are in their own, almost, yeah. And I think, I think it's hinting at something, that this happens, well, perhaps we should just simply try to befriend people and offer to organize some time between, little children and like adults in care homes or something like that. So yeah, I think that seems to me like something that most people would be able to do, perhaps in some capacity. And I think perhaps building a community, bottom up is a bit more realistic in a way than voting that we will establish a community, of close relationships. So, yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. I think that's perhaps the thing that can be taken forward.
That's a positive note to end on. What's the solution, or one of the solutions? Make friends with your neighbor, get to know each other, support each other, look after each other. And that's going to prevent these feelings of despair and hopelessness and so on and so forth, and give us all purpose in life. And then the legal disputes and political disputes, they can sort of rumble on and they'll go where they go. But at the very least, in our own intimate circles, we're removing the need for assisted dying and euthanasia. And then in that sense, it becomes a bit of a moot point, at least at a local level. That's something pretty positive, and that's something we can all do. Good, I like that. Well, I think we're coming up to time. Do you have anything you want to add? Anything you want to plug? Is there any way that the viewers can follow you on Twitter or anything like that? Or
yeah, I think I think you have my Twitter handle. You can just tag me. That will suffice. It's a bit of a mixed bag, but I sometimes tweet about. It's a bit of bioethics, a bit of science, and occasional other stuff. But I think the main message is that people, in these tough times, we have to try to take care of ourselves, for the moment, and perhaps try to take care of those around you as well.
That sounds good. Okay, well, I'll include a link. I'll include your Twitter handle in the video description. And yeah, I think, viewer, that's the takeaway message. Look after each other and look after yourselves. Michal, shall we say goodbye, and then I'll stop recording and we can then have a chat and wrap up. But I'll see you later, viewer. Hope you enjoyed it. There we go. All right, bye.